the heart of New England, where history is etched into the landscape and autumns burn with a fiery brilliance. Some stories don't have an ending. They are tales of lives interrupted, of questions left hanging in the cold winter air. This is one of those stories. It's the story of a young woman on the cusp of her future. A daughter, a sister, an athlete, a student, a woman who, on a dark night in February of 2004, drove toward the skeletal woods of the White Mountains and vanished, leaving behind only a car, a collection of unanswered questions and a silence that has stretched into decades. This is the true story of Maura Murray. Born in the spring of 1982, Maura was a bright spark in the Murray family of Hampshire, Massachusetts. The fourth of 5 children, she grew up in a busy, loving Irish Catholic home. From an early age, she was a study in contrasts-driven and competitive, yet known for her kindness and a goofy sense of humor that could light up a room. At Whitman-Hanson Regional High School, she wasn't just a good student. She was a star, a gifted long-distance runner. She shattered records on the track, her name becoming a fixture in local sports pages. Her academic prowess was just as notable, earning her a place in the national hunt or society and the admiration of her teachers and peers. Her future seemed limitless, paved with the promise of her own ambition. Following a path her older sister had walked before her, Maura secured a coveted appointment to the United States Military Academy at West Point. It was a testament to her discipline and her desire to challenge herself at the highest level. Immersed in the demanding world of a cadet, she began a course of study in chemical engineering. For 3 semesters, she met the rigorous demands of military life while continuing to compete as a runner. But the rigid structure of West Point, a world of unflinching order and command, ultimately wasn't her path. In a decision that reflected a quiet strength, she chose to leave the academy. In the fall of 2002, she found a new beginning at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Enrolling in the university's prestigious nursing program, she seemed to find her footing. It was a future dedicated to caring for others, a path that felt right. She was a dedicated student, balancing a demanding course load with part-time jobs, including one with campus security. She was in a serious, long-distance relationship with Billy Roush, a fellow West Pointer now stationed at Fort Sill in Oklahoma. Through phone calls and emails, they maintained their connection, planning a future that seemed just over the horizon. To the outside world, Maura Murray was thriving, a bright, capable young woman charting a course for a successful life. But beneath the surface, subtle fractures were beginning to form. In November of 2003, 3 months before her disappearance, Maura was charged with improper use of a credit card after using a number she found on a misplaced card. It was an uncharacteristic lapse in judgment, and the charge was slated to be dismissed following 3 months of good behavior. It was a minor legal trouble, but it was a crack in an otherwise pristine facade. Then came the week that would change everything. On the night of Thursday, February 5th, 2004, Maura was working a shift at her campus security job. A phone call came in. What was said remains unknown, but its effect was profound. Her supervisor found her moments later, staring into space, completely unresponsive. The supervisor had to walk her back to her dorm room. The only words she could reportedly muster, repeated quietly, "Where my sister?" The next day, her father, Fred Murray, arrived in Amherst from his home in Connecticut. He had planned a weekend visit to help Maura shop for a new, more reliable used car. They spent Friday together, and that evening, Maura asked to borrow his brand new Toyota Corolla to go to a dorm party with a friend. Fred agreed. In the early, dark hours of Saturday morning, around 3:30 a.m., Fred was awakened by a phone call. It was Maura. She was distraught. On her way back to his motel, she had crashed his new car on Route 9 in Hadley, causing nearly $10,000 in damage. A police officer responded to the single car accident, but no sobriety tests were conducted and no citations were issued. Maura was given a ride to her father's motel. The next morning, Fred learned his auto insurance would cover the damage. He rented a car, dropped Maura off at her dorm, and made the drive back to Connecticut, planning to speak with her the following day to handle the insurance paperwork. That night, Sunday, February 8th, Fred Murray called his daughter to remind her to get the accident report forms from the Registry of Motor Vehicles. It was the last time he would ever speak to her. Monday, February 9th, began with a series of perplexing actions. In the first hour after midnight, Maura used her personal computer to search MapQuest. The destinations were not local. She looked for directions to the Berkshires, a mountainous region in western Massachusetts, and to Burlington, Vermont. At 1 o'clock that afternoon, she sent an email to her boyfriend, Billy. It read, "I love you more, stud. I got your messages. But honestly, I didn't feel like talking to much of anyone. I promised to call today though. Love you, Maura." Just 24 minutes later, she composed another email, this one to her professors and her work supervisor at the art gallery. In it, she wrote that there had been a death in her family and that she would be gone for a week. Her family would later confirm, with certainty, that there had been no death. At 2:05 p.m., she called a number that provided rental information for a condominium association in Stowe, Vermont. The call lasted about 5 minutes. At 2:18 p.m., she called Billy and left a brief, reassuring voicemail, saying, "I got your message. I'm not ignoring you. I just have a lot to do today. I'll try to call you later tonight." It was the last time her voice would be recorded. She then drove to a nearby off-campus ATM and withdrew $280, nearly all the money in her bank account. She was alone. From there, she went to a liquor store and purchased about $40 worth of alcohol, a bottle of Bailey's Irish Cream, a bottle of Collier, a bottle of vodka, and a box of Franzia red wine. Sometime before 5 p.m., she returned to her dorm room. She packed a black backpack with an assortment of items, clothing, toiletries, makeup, and several of her nursing textbooks. She then climbed into her own car, a black 1996 Saturn sedan, and drove away from the UMass Amherst campus. Her destination was unknown, but she was heading north. Just over 2 hours later, in the deep darkness of a New Hampshire evening, a resident on Wild Ammonoosuc Road, also known as Route 112, in the village of Woodsville, heard a loud thud outside. It was 7:27 p.m. She looked out her window and saw a car up against a snowbank at a sharp hairpin turn on the road. She called the Grafton County Sheriff's Department to report a single-car accident. A few minutes later, a local school bus driver named Butch Atwood was driving his bus home when he rounded that same sharp corner. He saw the black Saturn, its nose pointed west in the eastbound lane, jammed against the snowbank. A young woman was standing outside the vehicle. He pulled over and asked if she was okay, if she needed him to call the police. The woman, believed to be Maura Murray, replied that she was all right and pleaded with him not to call the police, claiming she had already called AA for assistance. Atwood knew this was almost certainly untrue. There was no cell phone reception in that remote, wooded hollow. Seeing she wasn't obviously injured and that she had refused help, he continued the short distance down the road to his house and, feeling uneasy, called 911 himself. The time was 7:43 p.m. At 7:46 p.m., the first Haverhill police officer arrived at the scene. He found the black Saturn, exactly as Butch Atwood had described. The car was locked. The windshield was cracked on the driver's side. Both airbags had deployed. Inside, in plain view, were Maura's belongings. Her AA card was on the passenger seat. The box of Franzia wine was on the floor in the back, its corner wet with spilled red wine. The bottles of Bailey's and Collier were also present. On the driver's side floor mat was a stain from a red liquid. Most peculiar of all, the rag had been stuffed into the tailpipe of the Saturn. Everything seemed to be there. Everything, except Maura. In the 7 to 9 minutes between when Butch Atwood left her on the side of that dark road and when law enforcement pulled up, she had vanished. There were no footprints in the deep snow leading away from the car. No signs of a struggle. No witnesses who saw another car stop. The 21-year-old nursing student, who had driven away from her life in Massachusetts under a cloud of personal turmoil and bizarre preparation, had simply disappeared into the cold, unforgiving night of the White Mountains. The first, most critical hours of the search for Maura Murray had begun, but she was already gone, and the mystery of what happened on Route 112 was just beginning to take shape. The flashing blue and red lights of the Haverhill police cruiser cut through the profound darkness of Route 112, painting the snow and skeletal trees in frantic, alternating hues. The officer, Sergeant Cecil Smith, stepped out into the frigid air. Before him was a black Saturn, silent and still. He approached cautiously, his flashlight beam dancing across the vehicle. It was locked. Inside, he could see the signs of a recent accident. The airbags, limp and deflated, hung from the steering wheel and dashboard. A spiderweb of cracks radiated from a point of impact on the driver's side of the windshield. The scene was eerily quiet, the only sound the crunch of his boots on the frozen road and the hum of his idling engine. Peering inside, he took inventory. A AAA card lay on the dashboard. Textbooks and CDs were visible. On the back floor, a box of Franzia wine was tipped on its side, a dark stain marking the carpet beneath it. There was no purse, no wallet, and most importantly, no driver. A cursory search of the immediate area revealed nothing. There were no tracks leading into the woods, no footprints in the deep snowbanks that lined the road, save for those of Butch Atwood, who had stopped moments before. It was as if the car's occupant had simply evaporated into the cold New Hampshire night. Soon, other emergency vehicles arrived, fire and ambulance crews, their own lights adding to the chaotic ballet of color in the remote hollow. They were all met with the same baffling scene. The car was here, but the person was not. The vehicle was registered to Fred Murray of Hanson, Massachusetts. When Sergeant Smith ran the plates, he had a name, but not a clear picture. He placed a call, leaving a message on the Murray family's home answering machine. A calm, professional voice informing them that their vehicle had been found abandoned. Back in Massachusetts, Fred Murray was asleep. He wouldn't hear the message until the following morning. The first person in Maura's immediate circle to learn something was wrong was her boyfriend, Billy Rausch. He had tried calling her several times that night, as she had promised she would call him. When she didn't answer, he grew concerned. He continued calling her phone, leaving voicemails. Then, he called Maura's sister, Kathleen. He asked her to call Maura to see if she would pick up for her. She tried, but the calls went straight to voicemail. A seed of worry was planted, but the full scope of the situation was still unknown. The next morning, Tuesday, February 10th, Fred Murray finally heard the message from the Haverhill police. His daughter's car had been in an accident. She was not with the vehicle. A wave of confusion, then dread washed over him. He immediately began calling, trying to reach Maura on her cell phone. But like Billy and Kathleen, he was met only with her recorded greeting. He then called his daughter Julie, and the family's frantic effort to piece together Maura's whereabouts began. Fred's first official call was to the Haverhill Police Department, where he learned the disturbing details: the abandoned car, the lack of any sign of Maura, the remote location. He told them he was on his way. He then notified the rest of his children. The news rippled through the family, a shockwave of disbelief and terror. Fred Murray began the long, agonizing drive north to New Hampshire, his mind racing. He replayed their last conversation, the one about the accident report forms for his own damaged car, a concern that now seemed impossibly trivial. He clung to the hope that there was a simple explanation, that Maura had walked to a cabin to get warm, that she was disoriented but safe. By the time Fred arrived in Haverhill, a formal search was being mobilized. The lead agency was now New Hampshire Fish and Game, the state's experts in wilderness search and rescue. They understood the brutal reality of the White Mountains in winter. Temperatures at night were dropping well below freezing. The terrain was a labyrinth of dense forest, steep ravines, and frozen streams. Survival, if one were lost and exposed, was measured in hours, not days. The search began in earnest. Teams of trained personnel fanned out from the crash site, meticulously combing the area. A helicopter was brought in, its rotors beating against the cold air as it scanned the vast, snow-covered landscape from above. They were looking for any sign of piece of clothing, a track in the snow, anything that would indicate which direction Maura might have gone. But they found nothing. Search dogs were brought to the scene, their keen senses representing one of the best hopes for finding a trail. A state police dog and a dog team from New Hampshire Fish and Game were given scents from Maura's gloves, which had been recovered from the car. Both dogs, independently, appeared to pick up a scent. They followed a track east from the accident site, down Route 112, for approximately 100 yards. And then, in the middle of the road, the trail went cold. The dogs grew confused, circling, unable to pick up the scent any further. To the experienced handlers, the behavior of the dogs suggested a stark and unsettling possibility that Maura had traveled about 100 yards down the road, and then she had gotten into a vehicle. As the searchers battled the unforgiving terrain, investigators began to dig into the 24 hours that led Maura to that hairpin turn on Route 112. The timeline they uncovered only deepened the mystery. The email to professors about a non-existent death in the family, the withdrawal of nearly all her money from her bank account, the purchase of a significant amount of alcohol that she, seemingly, never had a chance to drink, and the lie she told Butch Atwood, the claim that she had called AA when she could not have. The facts were a collection of contradictions. The pat bag in the email suggested a planned departure, a desire to get away for a week. But the car accident, the second one in just 3 days, seemed to be an unforeseen and disastrous event. Was she running from something? The recent credit card fraud, the car crash in her father's vehicle? Was she distraught over the phone call about her sister? Or was she heading somewhere to meet someone? A trip that was tragically interrupted. The puzzle had 100 pieces, and none of them seemed to fit together. For Fred Murray and the rest of Maura's family is standing at the edge of that immense indifferent forest. The hope they had clung to was beginning to fray, replaced by a cold, terrifying question that had no answer. Where was Maura? Outro music fades in the 100-yard trail that went cold in the middle of Route 112 became the epicenter of the entire investigation. To the trained handlers of the search dogs, the abrupt end of the scent trail pointed to one primary conclusion. Maura had walked a short distance from her crashed car and accepted a ride from a passing vehicle. Whether this was a prearranged meeting with someone she knew or a fateful encounter with a complete stranger was a question no one could answer. The scent dogs had provided the first major clue, yet it was a clue that led only to a void. It suggested Maura was no longer on foot, no longer exposed to the elements in the immediate area, but it opened up a terrifying new landscape of possibilities. For Fred Murray, who had arrived in the cold, unfamiliar town of Haverhill, this information was agonizing. The image of his daughter, alone on a dark road, getting into a car with an unknown driver, was a parent's worst nightmare. But Fred was not a man to be paralyzed by fear. He was a man of action, and he immediately threw himself into the search for his daughter. He was joined by his older children, Kathleen and Fred Jr., and soon after, by Maura's boyfriend, Billy Rausch, who flew in on emergency leave from his military base in Oklahoma, accompanied by his parents. The Murrays became a fixture in the small New Hampshire town, their faces etched with a mixture of hope and exhaustion. They established a makeshift command center at their motel, papering the walls with maps and timelines. They spoke with police daily, pushing for every possible lead to be explored. Fred, a man who understood landscapes and terrain from years of his own outdoor work, began conducting his own searches, venturing into the woods, knocking on doors, and talking to anyone who would listen. He was relentless, driven by a singular, desperate mission to find Maura. He printed thousands of missing person flyers, his daughter's smiling face looking out from telephone poles, gas station windows, and diner countertops across New Hampshire and neighboring Vermont. Meanwhile, the official search continued with methodical intensity. For days, teams from New Hampshire Fish and Game, the state police, and the local sheriff's department scoured the area. They deployed a helicopter with a thermal imaging camera, hoping to detect the heat signature against the cold ground. But the dense canopy of the forest canopy rendered it largely ineffective. Search teams on the ground formed grid patterns, meticulously sweeping miles of woods on both sides of the crash site. They searched abandoned buildings, hunting cabins, and every remote logging road in the vicinity. But day after day, they returned with nothing. Not a glove, not a footprint, not a single thread of clothing. The forest held its secrets tightly, as the physical search yielded no results. Investigators interstates worked to build a clearer picture of Maura's life and her state of mind. Detectives from New Hampshire traveled to Amherst, Massachusetts, to execute a search warrant on her UMass dorm room. What they found confirmed she had been preparing to leave, at least for a while. Her belongings were neatly packed in boxes, as if she were in the process of moving out. On top of one of the boxes was a printed email. It was the one she had sent to her professors and supervisor, the one that claimed a death in the family. Lying beside it was a personal letter addressed to Billy, detailing recent troubles in their relationship. The contents of her room didn't look like they belonged to someone expecting to return in a week. They looked like someone who was leaving for good. The media spotlight, at first a local flicker, began to grow into a regional blaze. The story was compelling and tragic. A bright, beautiful nursing student vanishes from a dark mountain road. News crews arrived in Haverhill, their cameras capturing the bleak winter landscape and the anguished faces of the Murray family. In their first press conference, standing before a bank of microphones, Fred and Kathleen pleaded for help. They spoke directly to Maura, hoping she might see them. "Maura, we love you," her sister said, her voice trembling. "Please let us know you're safe." They also pleaded with the public, and specifically to the person who might have given Maura a ride. "I'm begging you," Fred said, his voice raw with emotion. "If you know anything, please come forward. Don't be afraid. We just want our daughter back." The investigation continued to circle back to the few precious minutes on Route 112. Butch Atwood, the bus driver, was interviewed multiple times. His story remained consistent. The young woman was not visibly injured. She was cold, and she had refused his offer of help. Another neighbor, who lived within sight of the accident scene, told police she had seen a car stop at the location, and later saw what looked like a person walking with a flashlight, but saw no sign of another vehicle stopping. The timeline was razor thin. The window in which Maura could have disappeared was incredibly small, yet within it, she had managed to vanish completely. By Thursday, February 12th, 3 days after the Saturn was found, The official ground and air search was scaled back and then called off, without any new evidence or a specific area to focus on. The massive deployment of resources could no longer be justified. For law enforcement, it marked a transition from a search and rescue mission to a long-term missing person investigation. But for the Murray family, the search was far from over. The departure of the official teams left them feeling isolated, standing alone against the vast, silent wilderness. The hope of finding Maura lost in the woods had faded, replaced by the gnawing fear that she had met with foul play. The authorities had done what they could, but for Fred Murray, the real work, the work of a father who would never give up, was just beginning. With the departure of the official search teams, a profound and heavy silence descended upon the stretch of Route 112 where Maura Murray was last seen. For law enforcement, the case transitioned into a different phase, an open, but no longer active, investigation. For the Murray family, however, the silence was unbearable. It was a void that Fred Murray was determined to fill with action. He refused to leave New Hampshire. The end of the official search was not an ending for him. It was a beginning. Nearly every weekend, Fred would make the long drive from his home to the White Mountains. He became a familiar, solitary figure against the harsh landscape, methodically combing the woods himself, following logging trails and deer paths, searching under bridges and in culverts. He was looking for any sign, any shred of evidence that the official search might have missed. He revisited the crash site countless times, standing at the hairpin turn, trying to see what his daughter saw, trying to understand what could have happened in those critical, unobserved minutes. His search was a testament to a father's unwavering devotion, a quiet, stubborn refusal to let the forest have the last word. While Fred searched the physical landscape, investigators continued to analyze the landscape of Maura's life. The contents of her black Saturn were examined with forensic precision. The collection of items told a confusing story. There were her nursing textbooks, suggesting a student with plans for her future. There were CDs of her favorite music, and then there was the alcohol, the Baileys, the Collier, and the box of Franzia wine, from which a small amount had been spilled on the upholstery of the car, and the child's safety seat in the back. The most peculiar discovery remained the rag that had been jammed into the car's tailpipe. Police questioned Fred about it, and he explained that he had suggested Maura do this in the past, as a trick to avoid visible exhaust smoke if she ever had car trouble. A piece of advice that now seemed tragically ironic. The 2 points of impact on the car, the cracked windshield, and the deployed airbags indicated a significant collision. Yet Maura had told the one and only witness she was not injured. The damage to the windshield, a spiderweb crack on the driver's side, was consistent with the head hitting the glass from the inside. But without Maura, there was no way to know if she had sustained a concussion or some other injury that might have impaired her judgment. The electronic trail she left behind was just as enigmatic. Her cell phone, a Samsung model issued by her boyfriend Billy Rausch's mother, was never used again after her voicemail to him at 2:18 p.m. on the day she disappeared. Extensive efforts to ping the phone or trace its location yielded nothing. It was either turned off, its battery had died, or it was destroyed. It has never been recovered. Her bank account was never touched after she withdrew the $280 from the ATM. Her credit cards were never used, digitally, financially, and physically. Maura Murray had ceased to exist after 7:30 p.m. on February 9th. As the family continued their desperate public appeals, a few potential leads trickled into police. One of the most compelling came from a local contractor. He was driving home from a job in Franconia on the night Maura disappeared. He reported to police that sometime between 8 o'clock and 8:30 p.m., roughly an hour after the crash, he saw a young person moving quickly along Route 112, about 4 to 5 miles east of the accident scene. He described the person as wearing jeans, a dark coat, and a light-colored hood. He didn't stop, assuming it was a local resident out for a walk. But upon hearing news of the missing student, he realized the person he saw could have been Maura. The sighting was intriguing. It placed her further down the road, heading east, away from the populated areas of Woodsville. But it was just one unconfirmed sighting on a dark road. Another piece of a puzzle with no clear picture. The Murray family, realizing they could not rely solely on the official investigation, escalated their own efforts. They worked with a volunteer organization to create a dedicated website, Maura Murray.com, a centralized hub for information, photos, and tips. They reached out to national media, and Maura's story was featured on programs like The Montel Williams Show, bringing her face into millions of homes across the country. The family's goal was twofold: to generate new leads and to ensure that Maura's name and story were never forgotten. They believed that someone, somewhere, knew something. The key was to reach that person. But as the weeks turned into months, the initial flurry of tips slowed to a trickle. The snows of February melted, revealing a spring landscape that offered no new clues. The investigation, while officially open, grew cold. For the Murrays, the days were a cycle of hope and despair. Every phone call could be the one that brought news, and every moment of silence was a reminder of their loss. They were a family suspended in time, trapped in the immediate aftermath of a tragedy that had no resolution. The question of what happened to Maura Murray was no longer just a police investigation. It had become the family's life's work, a heavy burden they would carry into a future that Maura was supposed to share with them. The changing of the seasons in New Hampshire became a painful marker of time for the Murray family. Each passing year, without answers, etched new lines of grief and frustration. For Fred Murray, the search for his daughter was not a phase. It was his life's new, unwelcome reality. His weekends were spent in the woods and on the backroads of the North Country, a pilgrimage of grim determination. He developed a system, bringing ribbons to mark the areas he had already cleared, creating a vast, heartbreaking map of his own efforts. He spoke to hunters, hikers, and locals, showing them Maura's picture, his hope resting on the chance that someone, somewhere, had seen something they didn't realize was important. While the official investigation remained open, it inevitably lost the urgency of its early days. The case file grew thicker with reports and interviews, but no central, actionable lead emerged. However, the official stance began to subtly shift. What was initially treated as a missing person case, with the possibility that Maura had walked away voluntarily, was now increasingly viewed through a more sinister lens. In 2009, 5 years after Maura vanished, New Hampshire Senior Assistant Attorney General Jeffrey Strelzin, whose unit handled cold cases and homicides, formally classified Maura's disappearance as a suspicious missing persons case. While stopping short of calling it a homicide, the classification acknowledged the strong likelihood that Maura had met with foul play. The authorities made it clear they believed a criminal act was the most probable reason for her disappearance. This official acknowledgement validated the family's deepest fears, believing that a fresh perspective might break the stalemate. The Murrays hired a private investigator, a former police chief named Guy Parody. He and his team delved into the case file, re-interviewing witnesses and chasing down leads that may have been overlooked. Their involvement brought a new wave of energy, but the core mystery remained stubbornly intact. The lack of any physical evidence, no body, no weapon, no crime scene, was an insurmountable obstacle. Over the years, law enforcement would act on new information as it came in. In 2006, a significant search was conducted around a smaller frame house located less than a mile from the crash site. The lead came after the home's previous resident had a brother with a criminal history, and a cadaver dog reportedly reacted to a spot in the home's closet. Investigators descended on the property, removing samples of carpet and wood for forensic analysis. The family waited, their hopes cautiously raised. But the results came back negative. The lab found no trace of blood, nothing to connect the house to Maura Murray. It was another dead end, another wave of hope that crested and then crashed. As the official investigation ebbed and flowed, a new, unforeseen phenomenon was taking shape. In the burgeoning world of the internet, Maura's story took root. Online forums and message boards dedicated to true crime began to fixate on her case. A global community of citizen detectives emerged, dissecting every known detail with microscopic intensity. They analyzed maps, weather reports, and witness statements. They debated theories ranging from the plausible to the outlandish. This online community became a double-edged sword. On one hand, it kept Maura's story alive, ensuring she was never forgotten and generating a level of public awareness that few other cold cases ever achieve. But on the other, it became a chaotic breeding ground for misinformation, unfounded accusations, and conspiracy theories that often caused the family additional pain. Individuals tangentially connected to the case, and even some who were not, found themselves subjected to intense and often unwarranted public scrutiny. The digital search for answers, while well-intentioned for many, created a parallel investigation that was unregulated and often reckless, complicating the efforts of both law enforcement and the family. Maura's disappearance was no longer just a family's private tragedy or a police cold case. It had become public domain, a modern mystery for the internet age, a story told and retold by thousands of strangers, each with their own theory about what happened on that dark New Hampshire road. And all the while, the one person who held the truth remained silent, lost somewhere in the long, cold shadow of the White Mountains. The digital wildfire surrounding Maura's case grew with an intensity that no one could have predicted. The story of the bright young student who vanished became a modern legend, a labyrinth of clues and theories debated endlessly by a faceless online jury. Podcasts dedicated entire seasons to her disappearance, with millions of listeners worldwide poring over every detail. Television series brought the dark road in New Hampshire into living rooms across the country, each new program promising a fresh look or a groundbreaking theory. This explosion of public interest accomplished what the family had always hoped for. It ensured Maura was never forgotten. Her name remained in the public consciousness, a constant, low hum of unresolved mystery. But this relentless attention came at a cost. The Murray family, already grappling with an unimaginable loss, found themselves at the center of a storm of speculation. Their grief was public property, their every past action scrutinized, and their motives questioned by anonymous voices online. Fred Murray's tireless search for his daughter was, to some, evidence of a cover-up. Billy Rausch, Maura's boyfriend at the time, found his life and character dissected and debated. Every person remotely connected to Maura as last known days became a potential character in a story that was no longer entirely their own. In the face of this overwhelming public narrative, Maura's older sister, Julie, stepped forward. She became the family's reluctant but powerful voice online, creating a blog and a Twitter account to share verified information, to dispel harmful rumors, and to provide a direct line of communication for credible tips. She fought to reclaim the story, to remind the world that at the heart of the mystery was a real person, a beloved sister, a daughter, a friend, not a character in a piece of entertainment. Her efforts were a constant, dignified battle to steer the conversation back toward one goal: finding Maura, spurred by both the family's persistence and the renewed attention from media projects. Law enforcement continued to follow leads as they surfaced. In 2019, 15 years after Maura vanished, a significant search was organized at a home not far from the crash site. The search was prompted by the owners of the property, who, after being contacted by the production team for the Oxygen documentary series, had brought in cadaver dogs and a geophysicist with ground-penetrating radar. The radar detected a disturbance in the soil in the home's basement, a spot that the dogs had also independently indicated. Once again, the glare of the media descended on Haverhill. Hopes were cautiously raised. State police arrived with excavation equipment and forensics teams. They carefully dug up the basement floor at the precise location flagged by the radar. For hours, the family and the public waited, but the search yielded only what the geophysicist had suspected. It might be a fragment of old pottery or pipe. There was no link to Maura. It was another painful cycle of hope and disappointment, played out this time on a national stage. Through it all, Fred Murray's resolve never wavered. In interview after interview, his message was clear and heartbreakingly simple. He did not care about theories. He did not care about assigning blame. He just wanted to bring his daughter home. He spoke of his right, as a father, to bury his child, to have a place to visit her. His public persona was that of a man stripped of everything but a single, primal purpose. He continued his lonely searches, his focus always on the ground, on the physical earth that he believed held the answer. New Hampshire law enforcement maintained their official position. They confirmed they have investigated countless leads and conducted numerous searches over the years. They have repeatedly stated that they believe Maura is the victim of a criminal act and that releasing certain details of the investigation, including what they know about the first few minutes after the crash, could compromise their ability to one day bring the person responsible to justice. The case file on Maura Murray remains open, active, and one of the state's most enduring and frustrating mysteries. The gap between what the public thinks it knows and what investigators actually know remains a closely guarded secret, a source of endless speculation and a constant reminder that the full story of that February night has never been told. The hairpin turn on Route 112 is no longer just a feature of the road. It is a landmark of loss. For years, a simple blue ribbon was tied to a tree near the crash site, a quiet, unassuming memorial placed there by local residents. It became a symbol of the question that has haunted the small community of Haverhill, New Hampshire, for 2 decades. This is a town of hard-working people, accustomed to quiet seasons and the predictable rhythms of rural life. But on February 9, 2004, the outside world brought a mystery to their doorstep that has never left. The residents have lived alongside it, watching as news crews come and go, as search parties comb the familiar woods, and as tourists drawn by the dark allure of the story slow their cars. As they round that infamous bend in the road, Maura's disappearance became woven into the fabric of the local identity. It is a ghost story the town never asked for, a somber footnote in its history. For many, there is a protective feeling not just for Maura's memory, but for the community itself, which has been placed under a microscope for years. The case has left an indelible mark, a lingering sense of unease about the secrets the surrounding mountains might hold. Each passing February brings a fresh wave of remembrance and a renewed sense of grief. The anniversary of Maura's disappearance is a solemn occasion, marked by the family and a loyal community of supporters. Vigils are sometimes held, small gatherings of people holding candles against the cold. They light a small defiance against the darkness that claimed Maura. Her sister, Julie, uses the anniversary to issue public statements, to share cherished photos and memories, ensuring that the world remembers Maura not for the mystery of her death, but for the vibrancy of her life. These annual markers are a painful measure of the immense time that has passed, yet they are also a powerful display of enduring love and an unbreakable promise to never stop searching for answers. Beyond the quiet hills of New Hampshire, Maura's story became a cultural touchstone. It arrived at the perfect intersection of the burgeoning internet and a growing public appetite for true crime. It presented a puzzle with just enough pieces to be endlessly compelling, but not enough to be solved. There was a relatable victim, a young woman full of promise. There was a perplexing timeline of bizarre behavior, and there was the haunting, cinematic setting of the White Mountains. These elements combined to create a case that was uniquely suited for the age of armchair detectives. It became a foundational text in a modern true crime genre, influencing countless podcasts, documentaries, and online discussions. The case illustrated the immense power of citizen-led investigation, but also its potential perils. It set a precedent for how the public interacts with cold cases, for better and for worse. The story of Maura Murray is no longer just about the search for one missing woman. It is also about our collective, and at times obsessive, search for narrative and resolution in the face of the unknown. Out of this tangled legacy of public fascination and private pain, the Murray family has forged a path of advocacy. They have channeled their grief into action, working to help other families who are navigating the same labyrinth of a missing loved one. Their struggle with accessing information and police records in the early years of the investigation led to tangible change. In 2021, after a years-long effort spearheaded by Julie Murray, Maura's law was passed in New Hampshire. The law creates a new exemption under the state's right to know law, allowing families of missing persons to petition a court to access the investigatory files in their loved one's cold case. It was a landmark achievement, a piece of Maura's legacy now enshrined in state law, designed to give other families the tools that the Murrays had to fight for. It is a testament to their resilience, a way of ensuring that Maura's story, born of tragedy, could be used to create hope for others. 2 decades have passed since the Black Saturn was found empty on a dark New Hampshire road. The world has changed in countless ways, but the central question of that February night remains unanswered. The mystery of what happened to Maura Murray has not diminished with time. It has deepened, its edges softened by memory, but its core is sharp and painful as ever. Today, the case of Maura Murray remains officially open and ongoing, held by the New Hampshire State Police Cold Case Unit in conjunction with the Attorney General's office. It is, and has been for years, classified as a suspicious missing person investigation. Authorities have consistently maintained their belief that Maura was the victim of a criminal act. They hold fast to their position of not releasing certain key details to the public, arguing that this information known only to investigators and to the person or people responsible is their most valuable tool. It is a shield to protect the integrity of a potential future prosecution, a day of justice they still hope will come. In recent years, modern forensic tools have been applied to the case. In 2017, the FBI created a profile for Maura in its Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, or VCAP, a national database that helps identify and track violent offenders. Advances in DNA technology have also allowed for new, more sensitive testing of the small samples of evidence recovered from Maura's car in the scene. To date, these efforts have not produced a definitive breakthrough. The case remains a puzzle, its most crucial pieces still missing. For the Murray family, the passage of time has not healed the wound. It has only changed its shape. Julie Murray continues her tireless advocacy online, serving as a beacon of verified information in a sea of speculation. She manages the official family social media accounts, sharing memories of her sister and providing updates on the case. Her voice a steady presence of dignity and determination. Fred Murray, though now older, has never abandoned his quest. His searches are less frequent, but his resolve is undiminished. His message to the public, repeated in countless interviews, has become a heartbreaking refrain. He just wants to bring his daughter home. The family's message to the public is one of desperate, direct appeal. They believe that someone, somewhere, holds the key. It may be a small piece of information, something witnessed that seemed insignificant at the time, a conversation overheard years ago. They plead for that person to find the courage to come forward. to contact the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit to offer the one clue that might finally break the silence. On Route 112, the unofficial memorials have changed over the years. The well-known blue ribbon is gone, but the location remains a destination for those who know the story. A place of quiet reflection. The road has been repaved. The trees have grown taller, but the ghost of that night lingers. The story endures because it balances on a knife's edge between known facts and utter mystery. We know Maura packed her bags, lied to her professors, withdrew her money, and drove north. We do not know why. We know she crashed her car on a desolate road. We do not know what happened in the minutes that followed. Was she a young woman in crisis who, disoriented and perhaps injured, succumbed to the harsh elements of the wilderness? Did she successfully stage a disappearance to start a new life, a secret she has kept for 2 decades? Or, as law enforcement believes, did she cross paths with someone who meant her harm, her journey ending in an act of violence? These are the questions that echo in the quiet woods of the White Mountains. Beyond the theories, beyond the podcasts and the documentaries, is the simple, tragic memory of a 21-year-old woman, a promising nursing student, a beloved daughter and sister, who drove away from her life and never came back. The search for Maura Murray is now more than a quest to close a case. It is an act of remembrance, a vigil against the passing of years of family's unbreakable promise to their lost loved one, waiting for truth that has remained just out of reach, lost somewhere in the profound silence of the mountains.